Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be tackling Yuval Noah Harari's Nexus, a brief history of information networks, from the Stone Age to AI.
Sounds pretty dense.
It is, and we're going to go chapter by chapter.
Okay.
And really try to distill, the core ideas and give people a way to kind of digest it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the best way to approach these kinds of books. Sometimes they can be a lot.
So we highly encourage people to go and buy the book.
Absolutely.
Read the whole thing.
Yeah.
But this is just kind of our take.
Our deep dive.
Our deep dive into it. And we think you'll get a lot out of it. And don't forget to subscribe
to
the YouTube channel for more deep dives.
More deep dives.
Like this one. All right, let's jump right into Chapter 1, The Power of Stories.
So this chapter is really interesting because it kind of flips the script on how we think about human progress.
Okay.
A lot of times people think that individual ambition is what has driven us to where we are.
Right.
But Harari argues that that's not quite right.
Huh.
He says it's really our ability to cooperate on a massive scale that makes us different.
But how do we do that? How do we cooperate like that?
That's where the stories come in.
Okay.
It's not just about one-on-one connections. It's about these shared stories that weave this network, a human story network.
A human story network.
Yeah, that's the term he uses.
I like that.
It allows us to coordinate in a way that other species can't.
So the stories create this common ground,
Exactly.
Like a shared understanding that we can all kind of tap into.
Yeah, like a small group of hunter-gatherers.
Yeah.
They can cooperate just based on their relationships.
Right.
But you want to build an empire.
Yeah.
You need something more.
You need a story.
You need a story.
Okay.
Something that can unite millions of people.
Right.
Around a shared purpose, a shared identity.
It's like those origin myths for countries or religions that span continents.
Exactly. Or ideologies that fuel revolutions.
These are all human story networks in action.
It's incredible how much power these stories have. They really shape how we see the world.
Yeah, they really do.
Yeah.
It makes you think about how we make decisions,
Immediately. And what are we basing those decisions on?
Right. What stories are we telling ourselves?
Exactly.
And speaking of forces that shape our world, let's move on to Chapter 2, The Bureaucratic Revolution.
Ooh, bureaucracy. Now that doesn't sound super exciting.
I know, right?
What's so revolutionary about paperwork?
Well, think about it this way.
Okay.
Documents, they're a form of technology.
Okay.
Right. They allow us to scale cooperation way beyond what stories can do.
Okay. I'm listening.
Think about how documents standardize information.
Okay.
So we can track resources, manage populations, enforce laws across huge distances.
So it's like the operating system for a complex society.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But what's a real-world example of this?
Look around you. Sanitation systems.
All those pipes, treatment plants, regulations, they keep our cities clean and healthy.
Right.
That's bureaucracy in action.
Without documents, we'd be in trouble.
Big trouble.
It's like this whole hidden world working behind the scenes.
Yeah, like a deep state keeping everything running.
But does that need for order ever clash with our desire for less rigid systems?
That's a great question.
Systems that are more human-centered.
Yeah, it's a tension we're always grappling with.
Especially in the digital age, right?
Absolutely. So speaking of the digital age, let's move on to Chapter 3, The Truth About Lies.
Ooh, that sounds a little ominous.
It is a bit.
What's Harari getting at here?
Well, he explores this idea that more information isn't always a good thing.
Okay.
He says sometimes it can actually lead us away from the truth.
How so?
Well, think about the witch hunts in early modern Europe.
Yeah.
Those weren't just isolated incidents.
Right.
They were fueled by this growing information sphere. The more people talked about, witches wrote about them, documented their supposed deeds,
the
more real they became.
So it's like this feedback loop.
Exactly.
The information itself creates this false reality.
And it amplifies it.
Right. Are we seeing something similar today?
Oh, absolutely. Think about information bubbles.
Okay.
Algorithms feed us content that confirms our biases.
Right.
And we end up in these echo chambers.
It's like we're curating our own realities.
Yeah, but not necessarily based on truth.
That's a scary thought. It makes you wonder how we can even navigate a world like that.
It's a challenge, for sure, but one we have to face head on.
Especially as we get deeper into the digital age.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to Chapter 4, The Print Revolution and its discontents.
Now, this chapter dives into how the printing press
Right.
changed everything.
I mean, we all know it was a big deal, but like, how so?
Well, before, the printing press knowledge was controlled by a select few.
Right.
But then suddenly information could be mass-produced. It became more accessible, more decentralized. Literacy rates soared.
Yeah.
People could engage with ideas in a whole new way.
So did that lead to democracy?
In many ways, yes.
Okay.
The printing press made it possible for large-scale democracies to emerge
Interesting.
because it allowed for widespread political debate
Okay.
and the spread of new ideas.
But I imagine there's a flip side to this, right?
There is. Technology is adaptable.
What do you mean?
Well, while the printing press helped spread democratic ideals, it also played a role in the rise of totalitarian regimes.
Wow, how so?
Think about the Qin dynasty in China.
Okay.
They used print to standardize legal codes
Right.
and to spread their ideology. It helped them consolidate their power.
So it's a double-edged sword.
Exactly.
The same technology can be used for good or for evil.
It all depends on who's wielding it.
And what their goals are.
Right. It makes you wonder about mass media today. You know?
Yeah.
Is it still a force for democracy?
Or is it being used to control us?
That's a question we need to keep asking.
Okay, that's a lot to think about.
Data.
Let's move on to Chapter 5, the digital deluge.
All right, now we're entering the information tsunami.
We're all drowning in it a little bit, aren't we?
I know, right?
So what does Harari have to say about this new information landscape?
Well, he focuses on how the sheer volume of information is reshaping power structures and blurring the lines between truth and order.
Right, like it's harder than ever to know what to believe.
Exactly. And he also emphasizes the importance of looking at who controls the technology.
Right, we can't just blindly accept all the promises of the digital age.
We need to be critical.
Absolutely.
Like, think about the early ambitions of Google and Amazon.
Okay.
From the start, they wanted to centralize and control massive amounts of data.
Yeah.
It raises all sorts of ethical questions.
About privacy, about power.
Exactly.
It's amazing how their early goals are shaping the world today.
It really is. This digital deluge is both exhilarating
and terrifying.
Right.
How do we make sure it doesn't drown out critical thinking?
That's the challenge.
And democratic ideals.
Yeah, it's a question for all of us.
All right, let's move on to Chapter 6. From web to cocoon.
Okay, now we're getting futuristic.
What's Harari talking about here?
He asks us to imagine a world where humans are a minority.
A minority.
In the computer network.
Okay.
Where we coexist with superintelligent AI agents.
Wow, that's a big jump.
Yeah.
So is that like a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, he explores the possibility of a silicon curtain.
The silicon curtain.
Yeah, dividing the world into different computer networks based on different approaches to AI. And these networks could become so specialized, so incompatible, that communication and cooperation become almost impossible.
So it's like a digital Tower of Babel.
Yeah, kind of.
But do we really have that much influence over the future of the computer network?
That's the question Harari poses. He argues that we have a responsibility to shape this future to prevent that dystopian scenario.
Of a fragmented digital world.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. From the power of stories to the rise of bureaucracy, the distortions of truth, and the potential pitfalls of the digital age.
It's a lot to process.
It is. Harari's given us a lot to think about.
He has.
And we're just getting started.
There's so much more to explore. Welcome back to our deep dive into Nexus.
Okay, so we just finished talking about how the digital deluge is like reshaping power structures.
Yeah, and how it's blurring the lines between truth and order.
Right. So where do we go from there?
Well, let's jump into Chapter 7, the data economy.
Ooh, this feels very relevant.
It is.
Like this isn't some abstract concept. This is the world we're living in.
Absolutely. Harari argues that data is becoming like the most valuable resource.
Even more than like land or capital?
Yeah, he thinks it's surpassing those traditional assets.
Okay, but how does that even work? Like how could data be more valuable than owning a factory?
Well, think about companies like Google and Facebook.
Yeah.
Their main business isn't selling products.
Right.
It's collecting and analyzing our data.
Yeah.
And they have so much data from billions of users that they can create these incredibly detailed profiles of us.
It's kind of creepy how much they know about us.
It is a bit. They know our preferences, our habits, even our emotions.
It's like they know us better than we know ourselves.
Sometimes it feels that way. And that knowledge is power.
In what sense?
Well, it lets them target advertising really precisely, influence our choices, even shape public opinion.
So the data itself is the valuable thing.
Exactly. That's the essence of the data economy.
It makes you feel a little powerless, doesn't it?
It can, yeah. Are we just pawns in this giant data game?
Right, exactly.
Well, that's what Harari explores in the next chapter 8, the algorithmization of everything.
Okay, algorithms, I mean, we hear that word all the time, but what does it actually mean for our lives?
Harari argues that algorithms are making more and more decisions that impact us.
Okay, give me some examples, where are algorithms already calling the shots?
Think about your social media feeds.
Okay.
The news you see, the products you're recommended.
Yeah.
Even potential romantic partners.
Oh, wow.
Algorithms are working behind the scenes, filtering information, making predictions, shaping our experiences.
It's like they're curating our reality.
Exactly. And that raises a lot of ethical questions.
What kind of questions?
Well, questions about bias, fairness, transparency.
Right, are these algorithms actually fair?
That's the thing. If they're not designed responsibly, they can actually perpetuate social inequalities.
So it's not just about the data, it's about who controls the algorithms.
And how they're used.
Exactly. Okay, so data is power, algorithms are power.
Right. And that brings us to Chapter 9, the politics of information.
Okay, so now we're getting into how this all plays out on a bigger scale.
Yeah, Harari looks at how the digital revolution is changing politics.
I bet it's causing a lot of disruption.
It is. He argues that digital technologies can be used to both empower and control citizens.
Okay, so give me an example of each. How can it empower us?
Well, think about the Arab Spring.
Okay.
Social media played a huge role in mobilizing those protests.
Right. People were able to connect and organize in a way that wasn't possible before.
Exactly. But then there's the flip side.
The control part.
Right. The rise of surveillance states, where governments use data to monitor and suppress dissent.
So it's a double-edged sword again.
It is. Technology is a tool.
And like any tool, it could be used for good or for evil.
Exactly. Our choices about how we develop and use these technologies will have huge consequences.
Yeah, we have a lot of responsibility here.
We do.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to Chapter 10, the information arms race.
Ooh, now we're talking about global competition.
Yeah, Harari takes us into the world of international relations.
So what's this new arms race all about?
He argues that countries are competing for information dominance.
Instead of nuclear weapons.
Yeah, it's like a new kind of Cold War.
Wow. Okay, so what are the battlegrounds?
Well, it's happening on multiple fronts. Cyber espionage, online propaganda.
Okay.
The race to develop artificial intelligence.
It sounds like the stakes are incredibly high.
They are. The consequences could be global.
So how do we navigate this new world order? Does Harari offer any guidance?
He does. In Chapter 11, The Silicon Curtain, he explores two possible futures.
Okay, lay it on me.
One is a future of global integration.
Where everyone's connected.
Yeah, the computer network unites humanity.
Okay, that sounds pretty utopian.
It does. But then there's the other possibility.
Which is?
A future of fragmentation, where the world is divided by a silicon curtain.
A silicon curtain. What does that even mean?
It means different regions develop their own incompatible computer networks.
Okay.
Each based on different values, ideologies, technological standards.
So like different digital ecosystems that can't talk to each other.
Exactly.
It sounds like that would lead to a lot of mistrust and conflict.
It could. Communication and cooperation would become really difficult.
It's like a digital version of the Berlin Wall.
Yeah, but potentially even more divisive.
So which scenario does Harari think is more likely?
He doesn't actually make a prediction.
Okay.
He presents them as two possible paths.
And our choices will determine which one we end up on.
Exactly. That brings us to Chapter 12, the human factor.
Okay, so after all this talk about technology, he's bringing it back to us.
He is. He emphasizes that even in a world dominated by computers,
yeah,
it's still our choices, our values, our actions that will shape the future.
It's a good reminder that we're not just passive bystanders.
Right. We still have agency.
Even amidst all this technological change.
Absolutely. That's a key theme throughout Nexus.
It's hopeful, isn't it?
It is. Harari believes we have the capacity to shape the future.
But only if we're willing to engage with these complex issues.
And make conscious choices.
About the kind of world we want to create.
Exactly. And that's what we'll be exploring in the final part of our deep dive.
The philosophical and ethical implications of the computer revolution.
It's gonna get deep. Welcome back to the deep dive.
Okay, so we've been talking about like the data economy, the information arms race, all this heavy stuff.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It is, but now we're gonna like dive even deeper, right?
We are. We're gonna explore the philosophical and ethical implications of all this.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right, so Chapter 13, the consciousness conundrum.
This sounds intense.
It is. This is where Harari tackles the big question of consciousness.
Okay, like what is consciousness?
Exactly, and how does it relate to this whole computer network thing?
Right, because we're talking about AI and all that.
Yeah, he challenges that traditional separation of mind and body.
Okay.
He proposes that consciousness is not some mystical entity, but rather an emergent property of complex information processing.
Hold on. Is he saying that, like, AI could become conscious?
That's the question he's posing.
Wow.
If consciousness is just about information processing,
okay,
then it could theoretically arise in any system that's complex enough.
So not just biological systems.
Right. It could be silicon-based, too.
That's a wild thought.
It is. It changes how we think about the relationship between humans and machines.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it raises some serious ethical questions, right?
Absolutely. Like if AI becomes conscious, what rights do they have?
Yeah, do they have moral standing?
Are they persons under the law?
It's like a whole new frontier of ethics.
It is. And this uncharted territory extends to the future of work, too, which Harari explores in Chapter 14, the automation age.
Yeah, robots taking our jobs. Everyone's worried about that.
Right. But Harari's take is a bit more nuanced.
Okay, how so?
He acknowledges that automation will displace jobs.
Yeah.
But he doesn't think it has to be a dystopia.
Okay.
He argues that if we manage it well, automation could actually free us from boring work.
Interesting.
And create opportunities for more meaningful work.
So it's not just about losing jobs.
It's about redefining the nature of work.
Okay, I like that.
He challenges us to focus on uniquely human skills.
Like creativity and
empathy. Things that robots can't do.
At least not yet.
Right, it's a hopeful perspective.
Yeah, it reminds us that we still have some control over the future.
We do, even amidst all this technological change.
Okay, so what about the big picture? Like, is the information age going to lead to utopia or dystopia?
Well, that's what Harari tackles in Chapter 15, the utopia-dystopia paradox.
Okay, so it's not a simple answer.
Nope. He argues that the same technologies that could lead to utopia.
Right, like incredible advancements in healthcare and all that?
Exactly. They could also lead to dystopia.
Like oppressive surveillance states.
Right. It's a fork in the road.
And our choices will determine which path we take.
He emphasizes that the decisions we make in the next few years are crucial.
So we need to be having these conversations now.
Absolutely. We need a global conversation about the values and principles that will guide us.
It's a big responsibility.
It is, but that's what makes Nexus such a powerful book.
Yeah, it's not just a history lesson.
It's a roadmap for navigating the 21st century.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
The future is not set in stone.
Oh.
Our choices matter.
Both individually and collectively.
Like, there are risks and challenges.
But also opportunities.
If we approach these technologies with wisdom and a commitment to human values, we can create a future that's both prosperous and just.
That's a message of hope, and I think it's a great place to end. So, to all our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Nexus.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
If you're intrigued by what we've talked about today, definitely check out the book for yourself.
Harari's a brilliant thinker.
He is. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more deep dives like this one.
We've got lots more to explore.
Keep those minds curious, and remember the future is in our hands.